Well, welcome in, everyone. Thanks for spending your Tuesday evening with us. You know what time it is. It's AFR time. Jay Smith, Bradley Kendall, throwing it in the back to Evan McDowell.
Someone's excited.
We see Scout over there on
It's
Switcher.
AFR time, baby. Let's get up. Let's get rolling.
That's right.
That will not be our intro song.
We were a little late
I
going
tried.
live tonight because someone had computer problems. Their computer just decided to die out. So this man's on his phone. He claims he's prepared. He's about to get roasted in the arguments. Let's dive right into it, Bradley, after further review.
Exclusive. Dabo left Clemson.
Yeah.
If you haven't heard.
Say it ain't so.
We want to
It
talk
is so,
about,
Evan.
We got Dabo
man.
leaving Clemson, and we're going to go over some possible candidates for who might have the job. I know Danny Ford name has come up. Jim
Steve
Harbaugh,
Spurrier.
Steve Spurrier.
I'm on the Harbaugh train,
Get your
baby.
khakis ready, boys.
Bring the
Harbaugh's in
khakis to
town.
Clemson.
It's for a doctor's appointment, too, so he must have some major medical needs,
And
which
did you see
obviously can't keep him on the field
SO
anymore.
Club is closing, actually.
I know, too bad. I
Yeah,
love the SO
they
Club.
didn't have
They're-
enough business to stay open.
You know,
Oh,
with
man.
Dabo leaving, the SO Club leaving, we might as well
This
just
isn't
transfer at
Clemson
point.
anymore, you guys.
This isn't
Yeah,
Clemson.
I know. And
Not
the
my
NCAA
Clemson.
revoked Clemson football's national championship. It came out that Deshaun had been taking money from
Dirty, rotten
New Spring
cheater.
Church.
Yeah, I mean,
And
you know what they do over there. They're always doing shady stuff. But we got LeBron joining the team, so that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
That'll be a nice
Good.
replacement.
Well, he may have to fill in because, Trevor Lawrence is out now. He took up the team.
And we're switching mascots also.
he's
Tiger Woods.
Trevor Lawrence is on the fencing team now, and Tiger, the golfer, is our new mascot.
So does that mean we both lose our bets, Evan, since Trevor Lawrence is now officially
I was
off
actually
the team?
wondering that today. If let's say we both end up being wrong about Trevor Lawrence's fall status, do we both have to follow through with the punishment, or is it like a double negative
Scout
cancels
says
out?
yes.
neither
Yeah, I
of
think
us?
Scout says yes.
We should have to do both, each of us.
Okay,
Shave our
so
heads
if
and
Trevor
get a tattoo.
Lawrence isn't either the second or third string quarterback in the fall, I shave my head and you get a hint of
Well,
tattoo.
you got to get a head tattoo. You got to
head
shave
ta-
your
with-
shave
Get a head
tattoo up
tattoo.
here.
shave
Now
your
we're
head
talking.
And get a head tattoo. That's how you know it's real.
I get to choose the tattoo, right? If I
I don't
win.
know, Scout, does he get to choose the tattoo? What's she saying?
Who picks the location?
She
Who
says
picks
it's a
the
Tiger
tattoo?
Vision tattoo. I think it should be Tiger Vision member's choice, and I think that Tiger Vision member should be me.
Maybe we should.
Can I get senior staff written on either cheek? Is that possible?
Senior staff should have to vote on what tattoos
There
we
we go.
get.
That's what I'm talking about.
I like that.
The real vote that matters.
No, but we did want to talk about this because this was obviously the April Fool's version of the Tiger. It's called the Kitten for April Fool's.
If you really believe this, shame on you.
It was very well done.
It was,
like
yeah.
it was really funny. I flipped through some of the pages earlier this afternoon, and I saw them all over campus, and I saw a couple kids talking about it. So it was really well done by our friends over.
I
at
also
the
like how
Tiger.
it's called the kitten, not the tiger.
Yeah, no.
You had me
Great.
fooled until you convinced me that Deshaun was taking money and that we revoked the national championship, because even if that's true, I'll refuse to believe it.
Hey man, Deshaun's coming back. He's going to coach the team.
There's a lot of Carolina fans though that say that the Clemson athletic department, especially when Dabo first started taking over, was getting money from New Spring. That's a conspiracy theory
That's a
that's
low
been
blow.
around for a while.
Well, hey, if we're doing that and it's working for us, maybe you should try that, South Carolina.
We're not here to debate. Oh, wait, never mind. Yeah, we are.
But one of the actual football topics that we did want to talk about tonight, something that we all three, I think, or maybe just the two of us, got in on Twitter.
Evan was
about
a
it.
supervisor.
He was moderating the
I
discussion.
observed from a safe
Earlier
distance.
this afternoon was talking about overrated programs and what constitutes an overrated program. Do you look at their entire body of work since the program came into being? Is it just the last 5 years? Is it just preseason hype? That was interesting. I mean, we had 3 or 4 guys chime in on that.
It was good.
And it was.
I know our followers hated it.
Yeah, they made some pretty good points. So, I mean, I guess you can just kind of summarize what all we were talking about there.
Basically, so thank you for Clay Travis for tweeting that, because that sparked this whole debate on why we're even here tonight talking to you about this. He tweeted that he believes the top 4 most overrated programs right now in college football, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was Notre Dame, Michigan, Georgia, and what was the last one? Was it USC? I want to say it was USC. Anyway, the
Evan
point
can pull up his tweet.
Yeah.
Clay
you go.
Travis's top 4 most overrated college athletic programs relative to national titles over the past 70 years. So that's the time frame he's using. Michigan, Georgia, Notre Dame, Texas at
Texas,
number 4.
I should have known that, yeah.
Okay.
So I agreed with 3 out of the 4. I don't think Georgia's overrated. I don't think they get recognition as being a really top-notch program. I think they're kind of like that mid-level on the way up. So they're like an above-average program in most people's eyes. I wouldn't say they're on the same level, in terms of national prominence as like Notre Dame and Michigan.
Well, I think you made the point about how, or someone made the point about how Clemson is,
That was Landon.
It was it is an elite program, and I mean, you think about it. Like I heard Qualk on the radio actually on 105.5 The Roar yesterday say how he thinks Clemson's an elite program and like they've established themselves, and they have.
Yeah.
The last 3, 5, even 8, 10 years
Going back to Dabo's tenure. Yeah.
have absolutely validated that. But when Tommy Bowden was here, growing up, Clemson was mediocre at best.
He was known as Bobby Bowden's little brother.
Yeah,
that was it. Yeah.
Bobby Bowden's son?
Or son, I meant.
Yeah, Bobby
Little
Bowden's
son.
son.
You know what I meant.
You even watch college football, Bradley?
He's a pretty new Clemson fan, so we'll give him slack on that. But no, seriously, like Clemson never competed on a national level. I mean, if they were ranked, it was a big deal. Similarly to how the basketball team season ended, being in the Sweet 16 for the first time and being ranked at the end of the season for the first time in 21 years is a big deal.
Absolutely.
And so I don't think that, some of the teams that we talked about, like Michigan, they've played in a bunch of championship games. I think they're 1-6 now. Are they 1-6 all time in championship games for all sports, or is that just football and basketball?
I want to say football and basketball. I know they've been to like 3 in basketball in the last 20-something years, and they haven't won any of them.
No.
And the last championship they have in football was they've had one in '97, which was split, and they've only had one national championship football since '48. So it's been a long time.
It's been a while.
But they're known as one of the top blue bloods in the country, which
I think a lot of
I'm
times.
wondering why.
I think a lot of times schools get that blue blood title because of tradition. There's a lot of tradition that surrounds Michigan. I know that the South is kind of the life of.
It's the hub.
It's the hub of college football. Like there's a lot of rabid fans down here, but there are just as many people up in the Midwest or the Northeast or even out west, Pacific out west, that are just as rabid fans.
Yeah.
And a place like Michigan has a lot of pageantry. They win. They usually do pretty
big
well.
stadium.
They have a huge stadium. Yeah. You could argue that they've been mediocre, and they have been the last few years. I mean, Harbaugh, make no mistake, has not lived up to the expectations that he was
especially
brought
with where
in.
he came from as a 49ers coach.
But I don't think that makes them overrated. I just don't. I think that they're just not living up to it's just poor performance.
I would disagree. I don't know, Evan, if you have any input in this. I think Michigan is clearly overrated. They were rated as the #1 overrated program all across the internet when I was looking at all these different articles. Just some points I found and some things to back it up. Like I said before, 1 national championship since '48, which I know championships aren't everything, but as an elite level program, you would expect every year the level of competition should be, hey, we should reach a championship game. That is the expectation. Haven't made a bowl game 5 times this century. They're 6-10 in their last 16 bowl games.
But they're all time in wins.
They haven't won a conference championship since 2004.
Michigan has a 45-game lead on the next team that would, some say, matter, because you have Michigan at 943, Yale's at 902. We won't count Yale because they've been in existence, like you said, since the 1850s. Ohio State's second. So that shows right. Okay, Ohio State and Michigan, one of the biggest rivalries in college football, one that most fans look forward to and want to watch at the end of every season. They're #1 and #2 all time in wins.
So winning in the regular season, you feel like constitutes being a blue blood program?
Championships matter. Make no mistake.
Well, absolutely.
Championships
no
matter.
one remembers the 5th game you play in the 2004 season.
No, but when you're at the top of the win column, it shows, I think more so sometimes than championship games, that you can have an extremely extended period of success.
Well, it also just means you've been around longer. I mean, Princeton's got the #1 most championships ever, and that was back in 1901.
Yeah, but Princeton, they don't play the competition that Michigan's playing in the Big Ten. Or
And-
other conferences, other
Well,
bowl
you would
games.
expect as a blue blood and top level program, you would be playing in top competition, and they haven't performed well.
Evan, you putting emphasis
as a team
on
in that.
win total, or are you putting emphasis on championships?
I'm
both.
first going to place emphasis on the fact that I'm about to play devil's advocate against both of you here. So I'm looking at the Michigan Wolverines entire NCAA championships ever page, just them as a school. I've also got Ohio State pulled up. So overall, in spanning every sport, men's and women's, Michigan has 6 more national championships than Ohio State does. Michigan has 36 NCAA team titles. Ohio State has 30. If I look down at football,
that's impressive.
Technically, it's listing here that Michigan has 11 football national championships, all 1948 or before, except that one 1997 split one that Bradley was talking about. And then if you flip over to Ohio State, the recorded number of national championships they have in football is 8, with their most recent one obviously being 2014, 2002, and then everything else 1970 or before.
I've heard arguments, and I mean, a lot of people will say you cannot be an elite program, you cannot be a blue blood until you have a Heisman winner. Personally,
That's one player.
I understand it's one player.
So is Lamar
However,
Louisville an elite program?
However, you're supposed. I mean, the Heisman is also a team award in some aspects.
Which is stupid, but
I still think that the team's performance affects who has a better chance of winning the Heisman. That much is abundantly clear.
yeah, but it doesn't automatically give you the Heisman.
No, but it gives you a pretty damn good shot.
Well,
It
most
does.
teams that perform well have a great player.
A school like Clemson that now has 2 football national championships, they've had unprecedented success this past decade.
Oh, I'm not denying that.
The only other decade
Yeah.
that Clemson's ever been relevant in college football was the 1980s.
Yeah,
Now, it is interesting that if you look in the all-time wins column, Clemson is in the top 25. They're at 23rd right now with 729 wins, and they're around schools like Virginia Tech, Texas A&M, Georgia Tech, a school that I feel like a lot of, but you got to remember,
Yeah,
Georgia
I mean, they were
Tech,
good back in the
just
day.
like Clemson, had John Heisman
That's
coach
true,
there.
but that was back in the 1900s with like 8 teams.
When you look at the entire program history, that's what I feel like you have to look at when you're talking about whether or not a school is overrated.
So if you're looking at the entire body of work that they've gathered throughout the entire course of their history, would you say that Michigan is on the same level as Nebraska? Because we're not going to sit here and think Nebraska is a top-level program right now. They're not.
Not right now. They have been in the past.
Tell me how Michigan differs from Nebraska. Because Nebraska was great back in the 60s
Okay,
and 70s.
Nebraska
So was
does
Michigan.
not get the preseason hype that Michigan does. Michigan.
Not recently.
Not recently. When Bo Pelini was there, they were usually. I mean, he had a couple seasons where it was rough, but
Yeah, they weren't
usually,
competing for national championships.
usually Nebraska was hanging around at least in the middle of the pack. Michigan, in the Harbaugh era, has been hyped up at the beginning of every season. I think that's
course.
been pretty apparent. Like every time
Well,
they get
he just gets the hype because he's popular around the country.
exactly.
Social media has a lot
You
to do
could
with
argue, tons of different things about how he gets that hype. Point is he does. It's just like Tennessee, who wins like 3 or 4 games, and then all of a sudden Tennessee's back, or Texas,
Miami.
or Miami, or USC. Teams that are constantly year in, year out, high recruiting classes. That contributes to it. They come into the season with a lot of hype. They're projected to win their conference or win their division or whatever, and then they don't. That's overrated. When you're a
Well,
team
they
like,
don't.
well, we were talking about earlier on
listen,
Twitter.
listen,
When you're a
listen.
team and you make the national championship and lose, that doesn't make you overrated. That just means that you couldn't close in the big game. If you're playing
Yeah,
for a
but you
national
got to make the
championship,
national championship. Michigan hasn't made a national championship since 1997.
they did play in
Before
one
that,
last night, which was kind of the whole point of
talking about football.
I know we're talking about football.
He wasn't talking about Georgia athletics as a whole. He was talking about Georgia football.
Clay was
That was
he
the
was
debate.
poking at Michigan basketball and Michigan football.
Well, that was just
saying
because
that
Michigan
they
was
could, and
relevant
he
at the
also
time,
doesn't
yeah.
like Jim Harbaugh.
His tweet does say most overrated college athletic programs, which I think if we were being completely fair would include like every varsity team that you have, but it's pretty obvious that Clay's talking football.
They're all
over
football
the
programs.
Football,
most recent
basketball,
memory.
or baseball. I think mostly football and basketball.
I think he's mainly talking about football here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think he's probably 85% football, 15% basketball right now.
But all I'm saying is this: why would he tweet something like that in the middle of the college football offseason when conveniently Michigan had just played for a national championship? I know it was in a different sport. I know this is after further review and we're talking college football, but I still think that was the motivation for Clay to tweet that. He watched the Michigan game. They got trounced pretty good by Villanova.
Rightfully
Villanova
so.
beat them
We saw that
fairly
coming.
well.
Yeah.
We saw it coming, whatever. But the point is that's what motivated Clay to sit there on Twitter and go, I think that the 4 most overrated programs, athletic programs, not teams, programs, are Michigan.
Well, how is
Georgia.
Georgia and Texas overrated if we're not just talking about football?
I think if we're talking about motivations for Clay Travis's tweets here, it's to piss people off. And he doesn't really care how right he is, and it's like I said, it's obvious he's talking about football, but he doesn't care if people care
Yeah, I don't
if
think
he's
he
talking
was-
about football, basketball, or women's water polo. Like
I
he
don't think
wants
he was-
to make people mad, and
Yeah.
that's exactly what he's doing with us right
It
now.
was definitely meant to incite some
But
controversy.
it was not about basketball. It was because they were playing in a championship game the night before, and he brought up the football part of it.
Maybe. I suppose I could see that. I still think that the motivation behind him talking about that, like I said, in the middle of the offseason when there's really nothing college football in the news, was because Michigan played in the championship game and lost.
You still
I think
can't-
if Michigan had won last night, you wouldn't see him tweet that.
But you still can't discount the fact that Michigan football is overrated.
No. Yes. Every year, and I know that at least, like
So you
this
are
past
agreeing with
fall,
me.
I am agreeing that Michigan football and other programs, Texas, Tennessee, USC, Miami, get a lot of preseason hype.
And I'm just wondering why they get that preseason hype. Why does Michigan, a team
You
that's
look at what Miami did in the 1990s. You look at the history of Notre Dame football.
This has nothing to do with the 1960s here.
It
this
does.
is
Yeah,
present day.
No, it's never about present day when you're talking about.
So what has
a
Michigan done in the last 30
blue-blood
years that deserves any type of hype? 30 years is a long time. That's a lot of teams.
Clemson hadn't done anything in 30 years before Dabo.
I mean, at what point?
That's all I'm saying. Clemson fans, growing up a Clemson fan, and I know you're from Charlotte, so you're nearby, but Clemson fans, even when we were mediocre, we thought we were a football school. It was always all about football at Clemson. And in the 2000s, Clemson was not any good at football, and South Carolina was not any good at football. But Clemson and Carolina fans still thought that we had elite, talented programs,
Well,
and we
a lot
didn't.
of teams are going to think that. Nebraska probably thought they
The
were going to
fan
be top
base
one.
does, but until the last 3 or 4 years, the national spotlight has not been on Clemson. At
Okay,
all.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all on the Clemson part of it. I'm referring strictly to Michigan here.
I think maybe the reason Michigan gets this national prominence isn't because they're this exceptional football powerhouse. We're not trying to compare them to what Nick Saban's got in Alabama right now. I don't think that in Tuscaloosa is anything close to any other college football program in the country, us included. I think the reason that Michigan gets this national recognition is the same reason that, and maybe to a lesser degree, that an Ohio State gets this same kind of acknowledgement, or even, and this hadn't been the case since Tebow graduated, but Florida. Like, you're not necessarily the best of the best, but you're consistently good enough to garner attention. Like, recruiting rankings, Michigan just pulled in a top 5 recruiting class last year, or this past fall. Like, that's better than us, and we're clearly a better football team than Michigan is right now. But Michigan is consistently staying in the conversation because of the talent they pull in, and to an extent, some of the history that they've got. I mean, you look at Charles Woodson, Desmond Howard, like, those guys are really good. Look at recent history. I mean, you got like Jabril Peppers, who was a pretty outstanding do-it-all defensive player. And you've had some really, notable, notable coaches leading this program. I mean, you have Jim Harbaugh, and you had Lloyd Carr, Bo Schembechler, these guys that you throw into the conversation anytime you're talking about, like, good college football coaches. So it's not that they're, like, the tip of the iceberg, like, best of the best. It's because they're kind of in that middle ground, but within that middle ground is also a bunch of teams that are not as consistent as Michigan. Like Miami, really good in the late 90s, early 2000s. You hadn't heard anything about them until 2 years ago.
But they always have great recruiting classes. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah,
a team like
that's
Tennessee, a team like Miami, a team like USC, every year they're pulling in a top 10 recruiting class. It seems like. Just
But-
about every year. And they usually don't even win their division or conference championship.
When will it come the point where we say, hey, this team's getting a lot of recruits and they're doing nothing with it? At one point, we're going to say, this program doesn't deserve this
I think when you
anymore.
look at a school like, well, first off, USC's obvious because of the location of the school.
Well,
And
that obviously
Miami,
plays a huge
Miami
factor.
is
Yeah.
huge too when you
And
look at the
Texas.
location of the school.
Yeah, with talent-wise.
Yes.
Yeah.
So location is very important. The history, whether you like it or not, is very important. Yes, you want to be good and you want to be relevant recently, but if you look at the fact that Michigan has
Recently, it's been 30 years.
Also, the word
they have 11
relevant,
national
not
titles
relevant.
and they're 4th all time.
Carry on.
I understand that Michigan right now is not where a school like Clemson or Alabama is, but there are still plenty of kids who grow up wanting to play for Michigan football as their lifelong dream. They want to play for Michigan football. They want to play for USC. They want to play for Tennessee. Why? Because Peyton Manning went to Tennessee and they want to be the next Peyton Manning. That's what they're trying to do. Now, you have Clemson all of a sudden with a guy like Deshaun Watson, and you've probably got a bunch of kids now in the Southeast that are looking at Clemson going, I want to go to Clemson and I want to be the next Deshaun Watson. That's their motivation. You've got to have a guy or a team that comes through and completely changes the face of the program. You could say that Taj Boyd started that, okay?
C.J. Spiller, yeah.
Yeah. And all of a sudden you've got other guys now that look at that, high schoolers or kids growing up, and they go, I can make a difference at Clemson, or I can leave a lasting impact at Clemson. And they're going to go to Clemson, and they're going to add to that legacy. I think largely a school's success or perceived success is based on their legacy. What their players do while they're there, what they do after they leave, and what kind of players they get as a result of that success. Dabo right now has been able to maintain that wave. We have not crested, so far as I can tell, on talent. We continue to move up. There will come a point that we're going to crest, and we will start seeing a downwards, just like with Alabama.
Not anytime soon.
Yeah, exactly. But just like any school, you're going to have ups and downs, and there will come a point where Saban will leave Alabama, and because think about it. I think a good example of this is South Carolina. When Spurrier was there, in the beginning, they had our number. And they beat us 5 straight years. They were nationally relevant. They competed in the SEC for the first time in a you could say their entire tenure in the SEC. And then they had that one season or season and a half where they started slumping. And Spurrier felt like it was in the team's best interest to back off. Now, you could sit here for 45 minutes and talk about whether or not he made the right decision. The point is they had ups and downs. Now, they're recovering. Will Muschamp is getting them back. They're not where they were, but they're close. I think they're more competitive than sometimes Clemson fans give them credit for.
And you can make all the excuses you want in terms of ups and downs, but when you go a long stretch without winning, that raises a red flag in my mind. It's been since.
So if Clemson, I'm just saying, if Clemson had not won 2 years ago against Alabama, even if let's say they played in 2 and lost both of them, does that mean that Clemson's overrated?
Well, Michigan hasn't played in 2. Notre Dame's only played in 1.
Yeah.
Clemson's already played in 2 more than they have in the last 4 years.
Though. Does that make them overrated?
But at least they made it.
That's my point.
Michigan's only made 1 championship since 1948.
I know, but they made that game last night, which is the whole crux of Clay Travis's tweet, which is what we were talking about. The fact that they made the championship, the fact that they went 14-0 our freshman year, means they're not overrated. You can't be overrated and play in 2 straight national championships.
I'm not debating with you if Clemson's overrated or not. They're not. They're an elite program right now.
All I'm trying to say is when a team makes a national championship in any sport, I don't think and loses, even if they've lost consecutive national championship appearances, I don't think that makes them overrated. I mean, Evan, I don't know. I mean, do you agree with that, or do you feel like that in order to be successful, you've got to make it and you've got to win?
I don't think you have to win necessarily. I think making the national championship would qualify as good enough, but also, like, let's look at any other women's basketball program outside of Notre Dame this year and Mississippi State last year. I mean, it's been UConn for the last however many years. Does that mean that every other women's basketball program that hasn't been UConn the past 10 years has been overrated? No. I mean, before Pat Summitt, got sick, retired, and passed away, those Tennessee teams were fantastic. Yep. Stanford always has a strong women's basketball program. I don't know why I'm using women's basketball as the benchmark here, but you get my point. There are good teams besides the teams who win. But to go back to Michigan and why I don't know if overrated is exactly the word to describe it. Maybe disappointing because you
underachieving.
Underachieving.
Maybe
poor performance.
And maybe it's because we expect too much out of them from the get-go because we know their history. And let me give you 5 reasons as to why I can imagine high school recruits think, "Wow, Michigan is this great college football program." Here's my 5 reasons: Desmond Howard, Charles Woodson, Jake Long, Braylon Edwards, and last but certainly not least, Tom Brady. All 5 of those players were not just outstanding college football players, but at least 2 of them had fantastic NFL careers. So if I'm a kid in high school, I see one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in Tom Brady. I see one of the greatest defensive backs in history in Charles Woodson, and I see one of the best offensive linemen in history in Jake Long, and all 3 of them have the same alma mater. I'm thinking, that might not be an accident. So that's why you keep seeing not just these recruiting classes that Michigan's pulling in, but also why they've gotten this reputation as being this football powerhouse that I guess on paper they're not, because they haven't won any national championships, but that doesn't mean they've had bad years or that they've been a bad team. They just probably weren't deserving of the hype that they got, and that's why we're fooled into thinking that they're overrated because they don't meet our insanely high expectations.
I do think history does play a lot into it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Which I don't think you were quite on board with at the beginning of the show. I felt like you thought that you had to be.
But I think it comes to a point where you can only look at history in one particular way. You can't
tell
just say
that to a high school recruit who's looking at the same list that Evan's looking at.
If it's been 40 years since you've had a Heisman winner or a championship, I mean, it's been a long time. Why would you think your impact or you are going to make a big difference?
And my counter argument to that would be Dabo had the same conundrum 5 years ago before Clemson had really ascended back to national prominence. It'd been, let's say, 25, 30 years since Clemson had really been on the national stage. Dabo's starting to get hot as a coach. He's starting to get good players, 3, 4 stars, but he really hasn't gotten a guy that's going to change the program. So he's sitting in some kid's living room talking with him and his parents, and he's like, "Son, we can change. Like we have, the tools and stuff in place to get Clemson back to where it was." And it's the same conversation that Jim Harbaugh in the 80s '80s, Clemson was the most winningest program in the country.
40 years ago. It's a long time.
It has, but that's the argument that Dabo's making. We can get back there, and he has to sell that. Jim Harbaugh has to sell that.
So then why hasn't Michigan been able to do that?
You could say it's coaching. You could say it's talent.
If you're an elite level
I'm not going to
program-
sit here and look at the reason as to why Michigan football hasn't made it to the national championship. It's hard to make it to the national championship.
It's
There's
also-
only 2 teams every year that make it.
It's also not that hard just to be good, and they're not that good. They haven't won a conference championship in 14 years.
The last few years, yes.
14 years. That's a long time.
Yeah, they've been mediocre at best.
Let me attempt to jump in here and play devil's advocate from a different perspective here. I think if we were to take, let's say, the basis for this entire argument that we've been having for the past half hour, the basis for this entire argument was Clay Travis's tweet, the 4 most overrated college athletic programs. So if we boil that down to football and men's basketball, because it's no secret that those are the 2 most prominent, most popular sports in college athletics in America, let's boil it down and say, okay, let's look at the best college football teams over the past 30, 40 years, because he said over the past 70 years, excuse me. But let's just make it easy. Let's go last 20 years. So let's take the best basketball program, the best football program over the past 20 years, and very rarely will the 2 programs match up from the same school. You know why? Because some schools are labeled football schools, some are labeled basketball schools. And that's why Clemson's going to win another football national championship a lot sooner before they ever even come close to winning a basketball national championship. Because if you look at the most recent national champions in men's basketball, you tell me how many of these teams have ever been good in football, much less the year that they won the men's basketball national championship. Villanova, North Carolina, Villanova again, Duke, UConn, Louisville, Kentucky, UConn again, Duke, UNC, Kansas, Florida, North Carolina, Connecticut, Syracuse, Maryland, Duke, Michigan State, and we're into the 90s
Well,
by
Duke
now.
has had some recent success in football. I
Relative
don't
success.
think that-
They've won the freaking Belk Bowl. Are you
Yeah,
kidding
but
me?
now
That's not
that-
national
for-
prominence.
but
That's
they
They
Duke,
scored
Charlotte.
7 points on national
now, let me
championship
tell you,
Florida
okay,
State
when
team.
Duke played Texas A&M against Johnny Manziel in that
Hell of
bowl,
a game.
that was an amazing bowl game. One of the greatest bowl games I've ever watched.
But
What?
nowhere near to a national championship. The
No,
only
I
time,
didn't say they were.
the
I just
only
said-
time in the last 20 years that a men's basketball team and a football team from the same school have both been equally as good and as relevant, not relevant, at the same time in the same year would be the mid-2000s. We had Joakim Noah running the paint for the Florida Gators on the court. You had Tim Tebow winning 2 Heisman trophies and a slew of national championships under Urban Meyer. Other than Florida in the mid-2000s, you have never seen any team be equally or even close to equally as good in basketball as they are in men's football, and that's because you can't do it.
No,
Which
it's
is why
physically
Clay Travis's
impossible.
tweet
It's
had nothing to do with
financially
basketball.
impossible.
Programs. Oh no, Clay Travis's tweet definitely had something to do with basketball.
How?
Because if Michigan had won that game
Outside
last
of Michigan,
night,
why would he include Notre Dame and Texas and Georgia in that?
Oh, well, I mean, I don't know his reasoning for Georgia. Like you, I don't really understand why you would consider Georgia one of the
Georgia's
most
never been
overrated
good.
programs. I wouldn't say they're never any
Well, they've
good.
okay.
Did
They
you,
had
did
a
you say
couple-
Georgia was never any good?
in basketball. They've never really been that
Okay.
good. They're
No, if-
historically
yeah, if
pretty
you're looking at
mediocre.
The point
programs.
is that if Michigan had won last night, I don't think Clay Travis is tweeting that about Michigan. Maybe he's tweeting it about another school. Maybe he's including Tennessee or USC. I don't know, but he's not including Michigan.
Well, if they win
Do
one,
you
it's their
think?
only
Do you
one
think
they've
when
won
Clay
in a long
Travis
time.
sent that tweet out, and I'm looking at the screen on the NCAA's official website right now, do you think when Clay Travis was typing up that tweet, he realized that Michigan made it to the national championship in men's basketball in 2013 and
Oh, he
lost
knows.
to a Louisville team that only lost 5 games that year? Now,
Also had the
granted, that
championship
title is
stress,
now
yeah.
vacated, but still, that's twice in 5 years that Michigan has made it to the national championship in men's basketball. Do you realize how statistically impossible that should be, given how many different ways you can fill out a bracket and how many different ways the tournament can go? Like, they're the only team in the last 5 years, other than Villanova, who's won it, and North Carolina, who won it and lost it, that have made it to the national championship twice in 5 years. Like, despite the fact that they lost both of those, that's still, all things considered, relatively consistent, wouldn't you say?
That's why I don't think he was referring to basketball, because if you look back, they've made 4 or 5 national championships in the last 20, 30 years. That's pretty good for a team that's not known as a basketball school. So I don't really think it had much to do with basketball. Yes, it was relevant at the time, but it was mainly about football, because he knows that Michigan football fans are crazy.
Oh, no, absolutely. Michigan football fans think that they are going to compete for national championships every year.
Yeah.
And they haven't. Ever since Harbaugh's been here, they've received a lot of hype. They have not lived up to the hype. I don't think anyone is arguing against that.
Okay.
I think that's the consensus. But my opinion is, when you're going to talk about overrated programs, whether that be all-encompassing for all varsity sports or a particular sport, you have to at least consider the team's history, because that greatly influences recruits, and it greatly influences the perception of the team. There is a certain perception of a team like Notre Dame. You can sit here and bash Notre Dame and Brian Kelly all you want, but there are kids and there are people out there that respect Notre Dame for what they stand for and their past success. And what
Yeah,
they've done.
because for every negative Brian Kelly argument or every negative Charlie Weiss argument either of you could come up with, I can fire back 5 Newt Rockne arguments to put you in your place. So it's not that we're arguing that the team in its entirety is overrated. It's that they're not what they used to be, is what it boils down to. Like Michigan basketball will probably never have a Fab Five ever again. And we're going to label them as overrated because they're not what they used to be. And Notre Dame football, the lack of success they've seen recently, except for making it to the national championship that one year and then getting absolutely pummeled by Alabama, they're not what they used to be. And they never will be because there's only one Newt Rockne. Notre Dame will never reach that same level of prominence, at least not on the same scale that they did back in the day. So it's not that these teams are overrated. It's that we label them with these high expectations because of what we've seen they can do in the past that is not even relevant anymore, because Newt Rockne was how many years ago, and we still expect Notre Dame to be one of these, blue blood college football programs. They didn't make a freaking bowl game.
That's what I'm saying. We shouldn't expect that.
No, we shouldn't. It's
Not at all.
completely unfair
But
to label these teams and these schools based on what happened over a half a century ago.
It happens though.
Which
I
is
think
dumb.
you can't. Well,
Well, it does.
I mean, it's
And-
dumb,
and
but
If
it
we were
happens.
students in
It
2090
happens.
and Notre Dame was still mediocre up until then, are we still going to say Notre Dame is a premier?
Well,
college
and it comes with
football team?
time. Let's say Notre Dame doesn't make a bowl game for the next 10 years. Yes, we're going to say, okay, Notre Dame
Okay, but
football
Tennessee,
sucks.
you could say the same thing about Tennessee, because Tennessee has been nothing since Peyton Manning. And every year,
Miami's been
wins,
nothing.
Tennessee wins 2 or 3 games. Yeah, Miami. But Tennessee in particular really irks me, because all of a sudden they go on a 3 or 4 game winning streak and they're like back in the top 15. And you're
God,
like,
why do you
Tennessee-
think I was so pissed when you said
Tennessee-
Miami was a top 5
Tennessee
program last
has
year?
not done anything. They have not competed for a championship. Okay, they've played in some bowl games, but the hype that Tennessee gets, considering the fact that they have done nothing since Peyton Manning went there, drives me
Then why does Notre Dame get
insane.
hyped then? Notre Dame was in the top 10 2 years ago, and they won 3 games that year. Like, what? Why? How does that?
Oh, I don't.
How is that
I'm
different?
not gonna. Well, we could spend an entire month talking about how broken the ranking system is. Okay.
Okay,
You could
that's-
sit-
yeah,
that,
it's
that's a
ridiculous.
whole nother conversation, and the AP poll and the coaches poll.
But
it's
even just the
hard-
perception going, it didn't have to be the number of what ranking
I think
you
the
get.
College Football Playoff Committee, and Evan, you chime in if you agree. I think they've done a better job at not looking at brand recognition in the polls.
Oh, they've done a great job
It's
with
still
that.
there.
Yeah.
It's still there, but it's not as obvious as the
I think
AP
if you ask
poll.
Baylor or
the
TCU,
AP poll
they would
is like
disagree,
Tennessee won a game, top 10. It's stupid. So, I mean, I don't know. Do you agree? Do you feel like the College Football Playoff has been a little bit more impartial when it comes to brand recognition?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, part of that is because of the disparity they put on wins and losses, which a computer simulation, the BCS system, never would have. I think that human factor is exactly what we need, despite the fact that a lot of people are saying it would be better if everything was just decided by a computer, because you can't argue with that. But, like, look at the teams that they've been putting in the college football playoff that without the playoff would be lucky to make it to the Fiesta Bowl. Year one, you got Alabama, Ohio State. Okay, those historically good football programs, or Ohio State historically, Alabama recently. Florida State, again, semi-historically, and Oregon, who never would have gotten a fighting chance had it been a computer simulation. Year after that, Bama again, Clemson, Oklahoma, and freaking Michigan State, who we all realized didn't need to be there anyway, but would they have gotten there if there wasn't that human element to say, okay, those guys are actually pretty good, despite what uniform they wear, what's on their helmet, and the fact that they're playing in East Lansing and not Ann Arbor. Year after that, Clemson, Alabama, again, Ohio State, and then Washington, who claimed that they weren't getting enough national recognition for how good they were. The playoff committee said, okay, here you go. And then last year, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, like that would have been the case no matter what. But that's the fact remains that those were the 4 best teams in college football last year. So you can look at the
Well, some
playoff
people
poll,
tried to say that Alabama wasn't one of the top 4 teams.
and then they ended up winning the whole thing. So
I don't remember who it was. If anybody was on the show that said, I just know there were a lot of people that were like, Alabama doesn't deserve to be in the playoff because of conference championships, because they're not the best team. Or
But you know why
whatever
they're
the argument
saying that?
was.
They're saying that for the same reason that Ohio State got in the first year of the playoff poll at number 4, and a lot of people said they shouldn't have because they weren't that good, but they got in because they were Ohio State. Same with Alabama, even though I thought that they were good enough to get in, they got in because, look who's been the best college football program over the last 7 years,
ratings.
Alabama. We can't not put them in with them in this conversation.
And it does, you're right, looking at that now, it does drive ratings and it does influence how many people are going to watch those games because if you have a Clemson-Alabama matchup for the 3rd year in a row, somebody who doesn't keep up with college football, if those people exist, might say, hey, I'm going to watch that game.
Certainly not watching the show.
Yeah, because, it's the 3rd straight year of this matchup. So I agree that definitely plays a role. I don't know. I feel like it's when you look at teams and programs and talk about whether, because we need to cut the break. We've been doing this for about half an hour now, about whether or not they're overrated. It's important sometimes to look at a body of work, but you can make the argument that recent success or lack of success.
Recent success plays a huge factor, especially when it's been so long for Notre Dame and Michigan.
You do begin to question why they are given the benefit of the doubt every year.
And like I said,
I don't disagree.
It comes to a point where you just got to say, hey, at this point, we just need to move on from that.
Well, we do need to move on. It's time to cut to a quick break. When we come back, I think we got a couple calls lined up, so we will take those once we come back. Had a chance to breathe, take a quick break. We've been going
meditated
straight
for 20 seconds.
for about 30 minutes, but it's been fun. I mean, it's been a good discussion. I feel like everybody made some good points, and
I think we came to somewhat of a consensus.
Yeah, it's still I feel
We
like
did.
Well, it's a bit of a stretch.
It's a complicated.
We like to think we
It's
did.
a complicated. I mean, like most things that we're going to talk about, there is no black and white answer. It's always a little bit of a gray area, and it comes down to subjective opinion. But like I said, I think we had a couple people that were going to call in. Now, not sure because we haven't gotten a phone call yet. But I guess anything else y'all want to highlight or discuss while we're waiting on our callers?
There's not really much. I mean, I like the fact that we're considering Clemson to be an elite program now. I think it's going to take at least 5 to 6.
Because we got our first caller on the line.
Take that, Bradley.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, we got Philip on the line. What's
Shout
up?
out to Amy.
How you
Her
doing?
boyfriend.
How you doing, Philip?
I'm good. How about you guys?
Phil, my boy, how's it going, brother?
Good, man.
So hold on. I think you just cut over to.
Did I?
Hey, Dad, are you there?
Hey there.
Oh,
I'm here.
So we
You
had
just
you both
cut my
calling at
boy
the exact
Philip
same
off?
time. Philip will have to wait.
we're gonna switch back now. All right, all right. You tell him that we're gonna call him back.
Okay.
Philip, you can hear us, right?
Yeah, I can hear you guys.
All right, what you
Cut
got
off
for
my
us?
man, Philip.
All right, so y'all been talking a lot about this Michigan being overrated. So I already know what y'all's most overrated conference is in the Big Ten. I want to know what y'all's second most overrated conference is in the Power 5.
Second most
Good
overrated
question.
Power 5. Well, if Notre Dame was in the conference, I would obviously go there.
They're
but
basically
they
ACC
are
at this
not.
point. I think sometimes.
Give me the Pac-12.
From the
I was gonna
Pac-12.
Give me
say
the Pac-12,
yeah.
hands
I mean,
down.
it's tough to pick a conference because there's individual teams from a lot of the conferences that are overrated.
Well, you think of a team like USC. That usually is what you think of.
I don't think USC is overrated though, so I wouldn't say.
Oh, they get
Pac-12.
hyped up every year. They get hyped up every year, and usually they don't really deliver much. I'm trying to think of other schools in
lot
the Pac-12 that get hyped up, and I can't think of any.
Stanford.
I might even.
Stanford,
well,
but Stanford's not
Stanford's
really.
had pretty sustained success over the last 10
I
years
don't
or
feel
so.
like they're an overhyped.
You want to talk about how overhyped the Big Ten is, but I think you have already forgotten last year's bowl season. The Pac-12 went 1-8, including 0-4 against the Big Ten. So I think it's pretty clear which conference is most overrated. We like to start the year saying, USC is going to be good this year. Washington had a pretty nice year 2 years ago. UCLA might be good. Washington State, Mike Leach, watch out.
Yeah.
Oregon, Utah, like all of these
I was
teams that we
talking
want to
about
label
more-
as spoilers, and they're not good.
I was
outside of
talking
the
about more
conference.
individual teams, like
Yeah.
historically.
I mean, you look
You
at
can
the
talk about
Pac-12
recently,
bowl
yes.
season, you can say, yes, last year the Pac-12 had a down year. They were the worst Power 5 conference in college football. But I don't think looking at bowl games from one season is indicative of.
Well, I mean, if you look at it from one season, the Big Ten was like, what, 7-1 last year? In
That's
bowl
very
games?
true.
Bowl games?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we would agree to say that historically the Big Ten's probably the most overrated conference in terms
They,
of the
they
teams
have the most
within
teams that get overrated. Now, you can also look at the Big 12 because you got a school like Texas in the Big
that-
12.
that carries a lot of weight.
Oklahoma usually gets a lot of hype. Sometimes they deliver, sometimes they don't.
And you could also say the ACC. Miami now included
I
in
feel
that.
like ACC is a legitimate argument.
Virginia Tech and Florida State is one that I've, until recently, up until 2014.
Florida State's been good until Jimbo Fisher left. They were good.
Yeah, until 2014 when they won that championship. From about 2000 to 2014, they had a stretch where they were very overrated for a lot of years.
I think anybody
They
that's
were, preseason, they were very overhyped every single year, and they never were able to deliver for about,
I don't
for about
recall
15
this.
years.
I don't recall this.
I think anybody that still wants to argue that the SEC is overrated is just ignorant.
No, it's not.
Yeah, no.
Because I'm looking at the last 148 years
Did
of
Evan
college
just
football
say the
national champions.
SEC's overrated?
He did not. No,
he's saying
No,
that
I'm
we're
saying you're
not.
dumb if you think
You
that.
can breathe,
Sorry,
Philip.
Philip.
You can breathe.
Phil's about to come through the phone and try and
Yeah, no.
strangle us.
I'm literally going to come through this phone and slap you.
No, I'm saying the SEC is still the best football conference.
I think historically and recently, yeah, I would
Yeah,
definitely agree with that. 'Cause
exactly.
we can't just sit here and ignore the fact they won 7 straight national championships.
Exactly.
That wasn't that long ago.
No.
So,
And it's
Philip,
not just
2006 to
you got LSU, you
2012.
got Florida, you got
Philip,
Georgia.
what would you say is the second most overrated?
I'd probably say Pac-12 too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
think
guess so.
a lot of that is the fact that it's fresh on our minds, and we saw them perform so poorly in bowl season.
Yeah.
And in all fairness, there are fewer people that will stay up and watch premier Pac-12 games.
Pac-12 after dark, baby.
But that's not as popular amongst not everybody's staying up till 1 or 2 a.m. So there's a lot of teams, and they make this argument every year about the Heisman, that don't get the exposure that Eastern Coast teams get,
Yeah.
or teams that are in like, Midwestern or whatever it is, time zones. They're only like an hour or two behind versus the Pac-12.
Mountain.
Mountain's like 2 or 3 hours. But the point is that still contributes to it. The fact that they play when fewer people are watching, and that, I mean, can anyone name all the teams in the Pac-12?
Yes.
I
can
bet
you
we
not?
can.
I mean, I could. But
I
it would
hope
probably
you
take
could.
it would take me a second.
Well, that's the only thing is I think you have less of a big-time program feel in the Pac-12. You got USC and Oregon.
Well, and I think the main
Other
thing
than
is
that.
recent history indicates that, like, the Pac-12 and the Big 12 from a success perspective are pretty even, but for some reason we put much higher expectations on these Pac-12 schools. But historically, if you look at it, like, Texas was really good in the mid-2000s. The rest of the Big 12 was too. I know we all remember Adrian Peterson, Jason White being at Oklahoma. Those were good football teams. Like, the Big 12 used to be a pretty good football conference and all that, like, not all that long ago. But outside of USC cheating its way to a couple national championships and a couple Heisman winners, when has the Pac-12 been good in the last 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, just recently Washington started being good.
Yeah.
It took
And
them
the
a
only
long
difference is the
time.
expectations.
Yeah.
We have come to find out that the Big 12 sucks, that the defenses are terrible, and that Kansas will never win another football game ever again. We don't put those same expectations on the Pac-12.
Yeah,
My question is why?
I mean, I think a lot of it again comes back to exposure. What is the media talking about? I mean, they're talking about games and teams that people are watching because there are times when people will stay up to watch. But when you have a game that starts at, I think Pac-12 games sometimes start at like 10:30 or 10:45.
So, yeah.
They get late, and if it's 2 a.m., there's not many people on the East Coast watching unless they're crazy like you and I. But again, I think that's part of the reason as to who gets the expectations. But
You
Phil,
tell me you don't want to see Oregon State and Kansas make the national championship?
I would
Can you
love to
imagine?
see a Beavers Jayhawks national championship. Let me tell you what.
Sign me up.
All right, Philip, we appreciate you calling in, man.
Yeah, boys, good to talk to y'all.
All right, but take it easy.
Peace,
Thanks.
Philip.
Yeah.
I think we have
Good
one
guy.
more call lined up.
He tried to call in and just.
Also, while we
minutes
wait
ago.
on that other call, trivia question. The last Pac-12 or Pac-10 team that was not the USC Trojans to win the national championship in football, who was it and what year?
The Pac. Oh, God.
Colorado in 90.
I think Colorado's coming to mind. but-
1990.
That's a very good guess. The year after that, Washington won
Oh,
the
are you
national
serious?
championship. Yeah.
Didn't even know
I'm-
that Washington had won a championship. in
I'm
the last
assuming they would have been a
30-something
Pac-10
years.
school at the time. Maybe not. They're currently a Pac-12 school for sure. Now, when they won the national championship, they might not have been part of the conference. So technically, Colorado might be right.
Yeah.
But in
And I would-
1991, Washington, by all major outlets except for the AP poll, which recognized Miami as national champions, Washington was the 1991 national champion.
And if Nebraska was in the Big 12 like they were before, I would have said the Big 12 was obviously overrated.
All right, we got our last caller coming in. All right, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right, we
you
can hear
loud
you.
and clear. Yep.
What you got for
What
us
you got,
tonight,
Dad?
Mr. Kendall?
Okay, so a couple comments. One, I don't think Notre Dame is very highly rated. If you look at I don't think high school kids give a rat's rear end about what happened 40 years ago. And so that's
My
just
father
one.
was
I don't see Notre Dame being high on high school kids' list.
Especially with the expectations it takes to get in there.
Exactly. So if you're asking, if you go by what's highly rated in the public's mind or by teams are rated by their talent. If you look at the NFL draft, consistently SEC is number 1, ACC is number 2.
Yep.
No, I would agree.
Right.
Yep.
In terms of numbers.
And then I was thinking when you guys were talking about being highly rated, if you're talking about performance, what teams, this will be a little bit out of the box, but what teams do you think perform based on resources devoted and recruiting opportunities? I would say the least performing teams, East Coast has got to be UNC Chapel Hill and West Coast UCLA.
UCLA's a good one because I think with Jim Moore, and Jim Moore, he's not there anymore,
Chip
right?
Kelly's there
yeah,
now. So you could see this change relatively soon.
Yeah. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see what Chip Kelly does at UCLA. But I do feel like that Jim Moore had a lot of backing from the administration for a period longer than he probably should have. And then they got to the point where they just got fatigued of him.
But I like the
feel
UNC
like
one, though.
Charlie Strong at Texas. Charlie Strong at Texas got, the full backing. I mean, even when the fans were like, fire him for multiple reasons. The administration was like, no, we're going to stick with him. And he was there for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, he was there for a couple years.
Didn't do much at all. So, I mean, I guess that's like looking at specific coaches.
But if you want to look at like specific like
programs.
recruiting hubs, obviously the West Coast is huge, but they've got USC to compete with. I think the UNC one's great because not only is it a nationally recognized brand with the way their basketball team performs.
Are we talking basketball or football?
I'm talking football. Everyone knows about UNC,
And there are that many kids that are going to UNC for football?
yes, but they're in the ACC. They have a lot of resources, like he was saying, available to them. They're in a great spot to recruit in the Southeast.
Force in the ACC.
Why is UNC not good or even
so
above
the
average?
so the argument is, why are they not good?
Yes, why are they not good?
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question.
No, we're not arguing if UNC's good or not. That's a clear answer.
I thought we were talking about teams that do have the resources but are not performing.
That's what we're saying.
I think you can make the argument UNC doesn't have the resources because they're a basketball school. So where does most of their athletic department money come from / go to? How about Michael Jordan's old team, his alma mater?
Yeah.
I think given the choice, UNC is going to say, yeah, we'd much rather be a better basketball team than a football team. But it's funny, Mr. Kendall, that you bring that up because I've got this article called The 25 Most Overrated College Football Teams. And it takes into account a team's preseason ranking and it compares it to their postseason ranking to see if they did like the same, better, or worse, and what % of the time their postseason ranking compares to their preseason ranking. And so the top 5 on this list: Notre Dame, Texas, Florida State, Penn State, Florida. And so it says their average preseason rank, and then it compares what % of the time they finish about the same, what % of the time they finish the year higher ranked than they started, and what % of the time they finish worse than their preseason rank. And all 5 of those teams over the last, I think this was from 1997 to 2016, finished worse than their preseason ranking 70% of the time, which I think is the definition of overrated.
And I actually had that exact article pulled up, and I was going to bring up the point. Notre Dame and Florida State were up there. I mean, you talked about Florida State not ever being overrated. It goes to show, they were highly rated to begin the season, and then didn't perform up to par.
You lose your quarterback.
Well, that was one particular year, but if you want to look at an entire 15-year span, it was clear. Yeah. What were you going to say, Dad?
Hey, Jay, I have a question. If you consider Carolina basketball school, which I certainly would based on success, do you consider a Michigan a football school or a basketball school?
I think, and being
Flip a
more
coin,
of a college
Jay.
football junkie than a college basketball fan, I mean, I keep up with college basketball, but not quite the level like Bradley would. I probably would categorize it as a football school.
Ooh,
I
you're
think-
arguing with your boy Pat Godfrey in the comment section on our video on Facebook right now.
Uh-oh,
He
I'll
says,
have to-
historically, Miami is a better program than Michigan.
That's true.
Historically, yes.
It's absolutely
I think
true.
so.
Yeah.
When you look at football,
Slight
but-
argument, I'll say.
But I think, going back to Mr. Kendall's point, I would consider Michigan a football school because of
I want to hear why.
their rivalry with Ohio State, the fact that they are first all-time in wins. I personally think that all-time wins matter a good deal, and it's a large
Like I said,
indicator of success.
That indicates
We're
you've been
in-
around for a while.
sucks.
I mean,
to suck.
Yale and
Sucks
Princeton
to,
are up there.
Sucks to suck that your team wasn't around. Like you still were around, and you were
You
still
cannot
winning
use the
games.
argument that they just weren't
Look,
around.
bro, back in the early 1900s, they were playing like 7 or 6 games every regular season. I mean,
and
I
they
think
had 7
Clemson-
teams to compete with the whole year.
Yes, but
across
they're,
the
they're
country.
still playing games. I think though that Michigan's more a football school than a basketball school. But
And I would argue they're a basketball school. I don't see
Michigan?
They've been to 4 national championships in the since '91, I believe. Dad, I think that's right. Since '91, 4
Yeah,
national
maybe true,
championships.
yeah.
Michigan's been to 2 national championships in football since 1948.
But they still have 11. They
And
have
also-
11.
back in the day.
If we go back to
See,
our
that's my argument. I feel like
Maybe.
that counts because they're there.
if we go back to our recruiting talk and the fact that X number of these really good individual players went to this school for this sport, if you compare Michigan's best football players to their best basketball players, it's not even close. So their football players are winning out. The 2 best Michigan basketball players, Chris Webber and Jalen Rose, I would compare those to the 2 best Michigan football players of all time, Desmond Howard I just lost his name.
Charles Woodson.
Charles Woodson, that was
Look,
it. I kept thinking Tom Brady, but at
Chris
Michigan he
Webber
wasn't
and
that good.
Jalen Rose are 2 Hall of Famers. So I don't know.
Jalen Rose is doing a good job on TV. though.
What's your difference between them two? I mean, one won a Heisman, or both won the Heisman.
Both of them
they
won a
didn't win
Heisman.
championships?
How many Naismith Awards did Chris Webber and Jalen Rose have
played
combined?
a year, and Jalen Rose played a year.
Well, so then
Yeah,
don't
well.
go one
Well,
and
they
done.
had 3
well.
years.
By the way, Cassie Russell was the best player at Michigan.
Yeah, he's up here
96
too.
year.
I just
You're
looked
talking
before
about
my
my
time.
He's obviously.
Yeah, and that's the
gonna
thing
have a
too is someone with more. I mean, someone who's older who has watched more college basketball, more college football, and has seen programs evolve over the years versus our relatively limited exposure the last 10 years is going to have a different opinion.
Then why would high school players have any other opinion than we would? Because high school players today weren't around back then. They hear
High
what their
school
dads
players-
say. to
High
them.
school players are probably getting visited. I still think that the coaches, that's what they're pitching to these kids. It's some schools, not
and it's
all
not
of
working.
them.
Because
They're
Michigan hasn't
still-
been relevant
they're-
in a
but
long
they're
time.
signing great recruiting classes.
Doesn't matter.
Explain the recruiting classes to me.
The
Why,
recruiting
if-
classes mean
if
nothing
those-
if you can't win with them.
But the kids are going. I don't care
It
if they're
doesn't
not
matter.
winning. That's not what we're arguing. The kids are still agreeing to go.
Recruiting rankings, I'm not going to argue with you because those are on paper. Those are facts. But I'm talking about
Peyton
program
Manning.
I think a lot of
Bradley,
it, too-
Bradley, Peyton Manning. Jay was talking earlier about how not good Tennessee has been at football recently, but they have arguably the best quarterback of all time on their alma mater list. That's why people go to Tennessee, not because Philip Fulmer did a really good job. No, Peyton Manning did a really good
Well,
job.
then who's Texas
And-
is one
and-
player to look at.
Vince
Vince
Young.
Are in the-
Do you
arguably
watch
the
college
greatest-
football, Bradley?
The greatest college football game of all time. Vince Young against USC in 2005, man. Are you kidding me? How?
He didn't
do
have
you-
an NFL. Oh my God. Okay, it's
okay,
one
no, no.
player. You
and
can't
that's
just.
all it takes. If you have one
Listen,
player that
listen.
Deshaun Watson, you will have kids that are going to come to Clemson 10, 15, 20 years from now because of Deshaun Watson.
You're going to tell a defensive lineman that he's going to be the next Vince Young? How does that
No,
make
you're
any
gonna tell him
sense?
he's gonna be the next Christian Wilkins because Christian Wilkins.
That
is
he didn't go to
changing-
Texas.
He went to Clemson.
That's not
And
what we're arguing.
these-
All right, hold on.
these four guys,
Let
these-
me hold on. Let's just dial this back for
Then
a
what's
second.
Notre Dame's?
No, hold on.
Listen,
let
okay,
me.
these
No,
four-
wait a minute, Jay. Shut up. Let me put this in perspective. I'm gonna put this in basketball terms, so maybe Bradley will understand a little bit clearer. Any Carolina basketball crew that Dean Smith or Roy Williams has ever had, how many times do you think they've said, "Hey, you could be the next Michael Jordan"?
Carolina's won championships a lot recently.
But they have the best basketball player in history
Yes,
on their
it
alma
matters.
mater.
The history of your players and the success of them.
you think
especially
100
after-
years from now they're going to say that Peyton Manning went to my school? You should
Yes,
come and play.
yes,
absolutely.
100 years
Yes.
from now.
His name is
How does
plastered
that-
across
how-
Neyland Stadium.
how
It
does
ain't
that
going
influence
anywhere.
He
them
is
at all?
considered the greatest of all time. Therefore, there are plenty of good, talented
Everyone's
kids
gonna
out
be
there
dead from
that
that
want to
team.
follow. They want to follow in his footsteps. It'll be a name plastered on a wall somewhere, and they'll say, "Look, this guy came to this school 100 years ago. Look at what he did in the NFL." The NFL doesn't exist anymore.
Great.
But
you can get
all I'm saying is
you can get all the recruits you want.
the history
but
of
you're
your
not doing
program and your players and your coaches. The fact that Clemson had John Heisman coach here is huge. It's huge. It may not affect a kid's
So
decision,
are you rating it?
but it's huge.
Is the overrated rating scale based on the recruiting rankings, or is it based on how well we've done
It is
recently?
based on, in my opinion, it is based on getting talent, raw talent, and not doing something.
All right,
big,
how
like
about this,
winning a
Bradley?
conference championship.
Bradley, maybe this will help you a little bit better. We'll bring this a little bit closer at home, not quite Clemson, but we'll go back to Georgia and how we were talking about how they are an overrated football program because they have a lack of national championships. But why do good players keep going to Georgia? Well, this might help. Herschel Walker, Champ Bailey, Matt Stafford, Todd Gurley, Noshawn Marino, Justin Houston, A.J. Green, Thomas Davis, go Panthers, I know, Richard Seymour, Terrell Davis. Do you see all of these good football players that went to Georgia?
Well, I heard a lot of them
That's why good
recently.
football players continue to go to Georgia.
Yeah, I heard a lot that are from recent, like 5-6 years ago. That's at least recent.
Herschel
where guys
Walker,
are-
5-6 years ago?
I'm not. You're talking about Todd Gurley, Matthew Stafford, those kind of guys. That at least shows that they've been able to do something with talent recently.
But they should have won a national championship with Noshawn Marino, A.J. Green, and Matthew Stafford all
Okay,
on
if
the
I'm a
same
high school
roster, and
recruit-
you couldn't win a national championship. That doesn't mean they were a bad team. Did
What-
they not meet expectations?
what
Sure.
would you
Did they
say
have
as a-
really good players, and that's helping them get more really good players? Also, yes.
If I'm a high school recruit and you come into my living room and say, "Hey, you're gonna be the next Peyton Manning," and I'm gonna be like, "Interesting. How many times have you said that to recruits?" "Oh, we say that to pretty much every recruit." Then why hasn't that recruit been the next Peyton
No,
Manning?
because you're
Why
special.
should I trust you?
You're special.
Why should I trust you to make me the next Peyton Manning if you hadn't done anything in the last 30 years?
Well, that's not their only selling point.
I'm
Let's
just-
not
that's not-
act
that's not
like
their selling point.
let's
No,
not
no,
act
no,
like
no,
a
no,
college
you have-
football coach walks into a living room and says, "Hey, you can be this player," and that's the end of the recruiting cycle.
Exactly.
Unless you've
No.
only watched The Blind Side and that's your only basis for college football recruiting, that's not how it works. You see the new facilities, you see them come to games, they see what the environment is like. Like if they go to Georgia, they see the hedges, they come here, they see the Oculus, the new football facility, go down to Tuscaloosa, all the history they have there, go to Auburn, War Eagle, all of this other stuff that goes along with the whole recruiting dynamic. That's just a small sliver of the pie chart that is what goes into recruiting a high school football player.
And-
You can
And then they
say,
see
"Hey,
you
we
get beat by
have Peyton Manning."
40 on during that game. Then what does that
But
say?
then you've got to take the recruits that Evan touched on basically everything they use to entice. You better believe that the football stadium is bringing in recruits, at least for visits. And you've got to have the coaches to develop them, to win games, to win
And what if they
championships.
don't?
Then you're overrated. If you have,
Well, then
if you
why
have
is
the
Michigan
money,
not overrated?
If you have the money, if you have
Come
the
on, Jay,
facility-
you walked right into that one.
Yeah, why is Michigan not overrated?
I'm
Why is
saying they
Michigan
are in
not
football.
overrated?
No. In football, we've talked this for
Okay,
45
all
minutes.
right.
You can
You
pretend
have
like
not
I
been
haven't
saying
said
that.
that, but I've said Michigan's been overrated for the last. On this show, we have talked about it numerous times. Michigan is proven to be overrated in football the last 5 years. They have not lived up to expectations. Harbaugh has not converted the talent and the recruiting commits and classes they've gotten into wins. They have not competed for a championship, and they've been owned by their rivals. We've talked about that extensively tonight. I don't understand where that's coming from all of a sudden at 9:04.
Because you said that Michigan is not overrated as a program.
When you look historically, they're pretty damn successful. When you look
If we're
recently,
going to talk
they're
about last
not.
5 years,
But they're not.
well, yeah, then we would agree on that, obviously.
They just don't. They're not performing up to where they could be based off of their money they've
So
allocated.
they're overrated.
Texas, Tennessee, Miami, USC, all those programs right now could be considered overrated.
Why are we having a debate? I've been debating back and forth with you, and you've disagreed with me for the last 45 minutes. I said Michigan's overrated, and you counteracted that.
I said that you have to look at the program's history.
I think what we should do is probably go back and watch the last hour of footage to see who said what, and then craft completely new arguments for next week's show. But I think what consensus we should come to right now, because we've been on the air for almost an hour and we're still yelling at each other about the same general points, is that it comes in waves. You're not going to consistently be the best football program in the country. Newt Rockney's Notre Dame, best football team in the country. Nick Saban's Alabama, best football team in the country. Now, is Nick Saban's Alabama always going to be the best football team in the country? Of course not. Is Alabama football going to reach a day where they're going to dream that they go back to the days of being undefeated and winning national championships in the second half with backup quarterbacks? Of course. Are they going to miss a couple bowl games? Absolutely. Are we going to call them overrated at that point? Yes. Is that fair? No, because we're basing it on the history, how good we know they have been. Just because they're not that good now, as opposed to how good they used to be, doesn't mean they're overrated. It just means they're not as good as they used to be. We just call that overrated. So just because Michigan football is not as good now as it either has been or could be, fact of the matter is they still swung a top 5 recruiting class this year, pulled in the number 1 overall recruit in the country the year before that.
They're going to go
They've
third
got-
in the Big Ten West.
and
we're
they
gonna keep
could
having this
very easily
conversation.
do that. And that's our fault for thinking that they're the top 5 best team in the country and should easily win the Big Ten.
And
Like,
I
that's
guess
our
it's
fault for putting those expectations on them. But
the
at the end of the day,
recruits' faults for going
it
there.
comes in waves. Michigan will become a better football team one day. They'll become a worse football team one day. But our basis for comparison will always be what they used to be. And that's true for any team. And so is that a fair judgment? No. Is it technically right to call them overrated? Also, no. But is that what we're going to do? Absolutely. That's why we've been calling Miami football overrated for the past 15 years, because they weren't what they were in the late 90s, early 2000s when you had Ed Reed and Ray Lewis going to school there, and like all these other just NFL caliber talent. Like they had 4 running backs on the roster that I think all ended up making a Pro Bowl. They'll never get to that point again. And if they do, that's when we'll say they're not overrated anymore. But that's only because we're using a basis of judgment for what they used to be. And so if they're not as good as what they used to be, we call them overrated. And is that by definition what overrated means? Probably not. And is that fair to that college football program, those players, those coaches? No. But is that what's going to continue? Yes. So we're going to keep calling these teams overrated whether they really are or not. And I think that is about the only thing that we can possibly agree on after the last hour's worth of shouting through this wall.
All right, so this time next year,
if
if Nebraska wins 4 games and you call them a top 10 team, we are going to have the same debate again, okay? Because that is exactly
we appreciate you tuning in tonight to the college football debate, moderated by Evan McDowell. It's been a lot of fun, but I think we need to call it a night. This has been
I'm sweating back here.
This has been one of probably my favorite shows that we've ever done. This is our 45th show. I really didn't expect this conversation to last more than 15 or 20 minutes, but I felt like we all had some really good points. Made some good arguments and kind of reached a consensus in some areas. But I still think, like we talked about before the show came on, or it may have been while we were on the air because we've been on the air forever now, how it's not a black and white issue. There's going to be gray area, and a lot of it comes down to subjective opinion, and it just depends
pretty
on
much is all subjective,
what you consider, to constitute being overrated or not. But I don't know, Evan, any final thoughts? I mean, I know you just summarized it there at the very end, but anything you want to add?
I would like to point out that before we went on air, you told me to make a list of my 5 most overrated college football programs, and I didn't even save that document because it doesn't even mean anything anymore. I have no idea.
I want to hear it real quick. Who was it?
I exited out of it, but I can tell you Oklahoma was number 1. I think Notre Dame did make that list. I had Florida State up there. I think number 5 was West Virginia, and I can't for the life of me remember who number 2 was.
West Virginia?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, because you remember like Pat White tore us up in the Orange Bowl, and we had high hopes for him at the beginning of last year with Will Greer coming in, and we were like, maybe West Virginia will run away with the Big 12, and then halfway through the year they completely crashed and burned like charcoal.
I suppose
Not
that's
very
that's
overrated,
kind
but
of
that's
kind of
Mountaineer
fair.
pun.
I
don't know. I couldn't come up with a good 5th one, and in recent memory, we've been labeling West Virginia as one of the best teams in the Big 12, and they just haven't been. So.
I had Notre Dame, I had Michigan, Texas, Miami, and
I put Michigan at 2.
Florida State.
Yeah, I mean, I had schools like Tennessee that I've talked about a lot tonight, Texas,
Tennessee, that's
Michigan,
what it was.
Miami, Notre Dame. And I know, like back in the fall, I felt like Miami had a good shot at competing in the ACC championship, and they made it there. They just didn't do well at all. So we'll see. I mean, Mark Richt's pretty new there in his tenure. Harbaugh's been at Michigan a while, though, and he hasn't been able to
4th year.
So, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see if the fans start to get
He's
fatigued.
been there a while with Brian Kelly.
Yeah, Brian Kelly's, and there are a lot of fans that turned on Brian Kelly, and they had a pretty good year last year. I mean,
pretty well.
They turned it around. So
Anyway.
it's been a lot of fun bringing you this
I gotta
version
go
after.
take a-
We're all going to need to do some yoga.
I need a
after,
shower.
after tonight's episode. I'm sure Scout wants to get out of here. So
bath.
it's been a lot of fun bringing you this edition of AFR. Thanks as always to Ryan and Scout in the back, and Evan for contributing. For Bradley Kendall, I'm Jay Smith. This has been After Further Review.
Thanks for watching.